Doug. Today is the 343rd anniversary of the founding of Philadelphia by my fellow Pennsylvanian, William Penn. In honor of the city of brotherly love, would you like to say something kind to me today?
Hey, JJ, use a jag-off.
Missed it by that much. Great accent, Doug. Welcome to the Diehards. One of the most important and often overlooked parts of the fantasy offseason is evaluating coaching changes. A new offensive play caller can completely reshape a team's identity, player usage, and fantasy value. Tonight, we're breaking down the new offensive coordinators, what their hires could mean for your 2025 football season. I'm your host, JJ Wenner, and I am joined, as always, by the fantasy orthical himself, Doug Orth. And we are thrilled tonight to be joined by one of the sharpest minds in the business, Rotowire's Jim Coventry. Now, Jim's been a respected analyst for years, a finalist for the FSWA Football Writer of the Year, and most importantly, let's be honest here, folks, he's one of the kindest and most generous people in the entire industry. We're lucky to have him with us here tonight to help separate the noise from true impact. Welcome to the Diehards, Jim. How you doing, buddy?
It's great to be with friends and colleagues, and you guys set me up so nicely, but everything really goes right back at you. You guys do a wonderful job, and I'm honored to be on your show.
Doug, anything you need to say to Mr. Coventry?
Not that I've already not said, but I'll speak to the general audience here. Hey, all kidding aside, there are not many people in this industry whose opinion or analysis I put much stock in because they don't have a great grasp on how the real game affects the fantasy game. Jim's opinions and analysis incorporates it all. Every time Jim speaks about football is an opportunity for readers or viewers to learn something about the game.
Yeah. 100% agree with you. It really is the blending of the two that make Jim's analysis so much more accurate. Is that fair to say, Jim?
Different for sure. Different.
In Jim's mind, more accurate, yes.
I called it different. I went with different first.
All right, gentlemen, before we hit start, Jody Smith and the team at Full Time Fantasy have done the heavy lifting once again. The 36th edition of the Pro Forecast magazine is about to hit the presses, packed with expert analysis, rankings, and draft strategies. It's your blueprint for dominating fantasy football in 2025. Be sure to tune in all summer long for your chance to win a free copy and crush your competition. All right, gentlemen, not to name drop, but I was listening to a few of our buddies, Drew Davenport and Scott Pianowski, on the auction brief the other day. And one of Scott's biggest takeaways from 2024 was to understand the impact of coaching on fantasy, not to undervalue it. And we have talked on this pod, Doug and I, so much that a player's success is dependent on where they land. So with that in mind, Heidi Hay, let's start in the same old place, Sweet Home Chicago. And let's talk a little bit about the Bears, Doug.
Okay, folks. So what we're going to do, we have 12 different teams to talk about tonight, so we'll try to be quick on the analysis or my part of the analysis here. So I want to point your attention to mostly the deep passing here for Caleb Williams, which was dreadful last year. You can see there 20 for 75, 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. And then the other thing I want to point out here is basically, so we have zone percentage runs, or the number of times teams ran the zone runs versus the number of times they were man blocked. And the things I'd like to point out here, there's about a 10% difference, man versus zone, man over zone, I should say. And then the success rates were quite different, but then the man run touchdowns versus the zone run touchdowns was 11-2. So those are the things that stood out to me about this. Jim, if you want to go ahead and run with this, and we'll have some questions for you at the end.
You know, where I have to run, though, is those numbers are fantastic, but I really want to cite Ben Johnson's numbers from Detroit and what he could bring over. And they were running 3 receiver sets only 55% at a time. 25. What does that mean? Luther probably doesn't see a lot of snaps if he's the number 3. That's the first takeaway. But we also saw Brock Wright in Detroit playing 49% of the snaps. There's a man named Cole Kmet who still exists, who everybody forgot. But Cole Kmet will probably be blocking a whole lot more than receiving. He'll get more than Brock Wright did, but he's not fantasy viable. But Colson Loveland, obviously, we saw the Sam Laporta effect. But in Chicago, the one big difference is the running game that Ben Johnson had in Detroit is not going to be taking place in Chicago. Chicago did address their offensive line. We love the additions they made. It's not the Detroit line. DeAndre Swift is not Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery. So this team is going to pass a lot, and the defense is probably at best average, so they're going to be scoring points. And the idea we like about Ben Johnson is his ability to get the most out of his offensive players. He made Jared Goff a difference maker when he needed him. On St. Brown, I always thought the production was well beyond his talent, and so I am very wheels up on the Bears offense. One last thing, Caleb Williams last year, that offensive line, the interior was so bad, not just blocking. They were not coached to pick up a disguised pressure. And whenever a team sent it, those defenders were in the backfield. Williams never had a chance. He'll have a chance this year. The other rookie quarterbacks, many of them like Bo Nix, they were given schemed up stuff, protection. Caleb Williams finally joins that group.
Well, I'll follow up here. So, Jim, first of all, is this offense going to run primarily out of 11 or 12 personnel in your opinion?
It has to be 12. You still have to focus on the protection of your quarterback. I think that is a big, and also remember, you want to dictate box counts. If you can get one less defender from going over the top, there is so much more you can do. A Colston Loveland, DJ Moore, Romo Dunze. You have to keep the defense on their heels. And I believe the Bears personnel is best suited to do that. I mean, Cole Kmet's under a pretty big long-term contract, and they didn't even whisper about moving him. So I have to think he's part of the solution. The offensive line, the additions, you got Tooney at left guard. Obviously, he had many great years. Drew Dahlman coming over from Atlanta in free agency. He was in a similar zone blocking system what Ben Johnson likes. Jonah Jackson, the right guard, often injured, but I think having that extra tight end in the field is going to help because that line is a galvanized. It just won't happen overnight, but an extra blocker is a big deal here.
I totally agree. So you want to get to Scott's question before we move on? Move to my next question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, JJ. I cut you off.
I was just going to read Scott's question. He said, "What are your guys' takes on Caleb Williams? He's not sold on him yet."
I give Caleb Williams a complete pass on last year. You heard me say a minute ago, the offensive line could not pick up a simulated pressure, and it was on film from week 1. Every team that played the Bears knew that was a cheat code to getting them. Caleb Williams ran for like 482 yards, top of my head, something like that.
Yep, that's right.
It was run for your life yards. And the passing concepts were bubble screens, but the defense was already playing everybody down because they knew you could get to Williams in less than 2 seconds. So Caleb Williams, complete free pass. Whatever your pre-draft thought of him was, you should reconnect whatever that pre-draft thought was. I never thought he was Mahomes, but he has weapons, he has a coach, and he has a line. I think that at quarterback 10, you're going to get quarterback 7 production out of him.
Yeah, I think that's very, very possible. I have a quick question about Luther Burden, then I want to talk about the running game before we move on to the next team here. So in your estimation, is Luther Burden pretty much a gadget guy this year?
I think so. I think they'll use him in some motion. Again, I don't expect more than 55% of the snaps. That usage in Detroit's going to carry over. How do you not scheme up passes to Odunze and, of course, DJ Moore first? And then we know Loveland was seen as the Joker. So I just don't know, even in limited snaps, how do you get Burden the ball schemed up? It's going to be, like you said, some gadgety work. There's going to be no regular pattern to his production or usage.
Agree. And I think you already touched on DeAndre Swift in the running game. Ben Johnson leaned heavily on zone runs in Detroit. Do you think that is a Gibbs, Montgomery, Detroit O-line thing, or is that a Johnson thing? And furthermore, most of us understand Swift likes to run or bounce things outside. Does he have the vision to be the primary back in this offense?
That's the one thing DeAndre Swift does not have. He has no vision at all. And this is a concern. This is a concern. Yep. And so you're right. We don't know exactly what Ben Johnson's going to do, but we know when he brought in Dahlman, look, he was the top center name, but he was a zone scheme blocker. So they're in bringing Jonah Jackson in. He's often injured, but he played under Johnson. So to me, if you bring those guys in, you're going to probably run zone because that is what Ben Johnson had, when they worked this together. Ben Johnson got all the groceries he needed. So to me, those two tip-offs tell me they're going to run zone, and DeAndre Swift will still get volume, and he's going to see lighter boxes. So even though his vision's terrible, he might get good enough blocking where he just produces volume-based stats.
And that right there is why we wanted to have Jim on the show. That's great input about bringing the offensive lineman, this specific offensive lineman that they brought in. So thank you for that, Jim.
All right, well, let's go down to Dallas.
So the things that stand out here most were and this is Dak Prescott. Remember, he didn't play very many games, probably a little over half the season, maybe. I don't remember off the top of my head, but the thing I want to direct your attention to is the medium range passing, 10 to 19 yards there. And you'd certainly like to have that your completion rate higher than 52% essentially in the 4 to 6 touchdown to interception ratio. Not great. The other thing that stood out to me when I was reviewing this was 55% zone runs versus 20, almost basically 30% man runs. And then as you would expect with there being such a disparity in zone run versus man runs, you had 5 touchdowns, zone runs, and 0 man touchdown runs. So anything about that jump out to you, Jim?
The biggest thing, even as you point this out, is Dallas has a real personnel problem at running back. Javonte Williams could no longer break tackles, was no longer churning yards after contact. He's well removed from that injury. He caught about 53 passes last year. Jaden Blue, 5th-round pick. Okay, maybe. So regardless of scheme, I don't think they have a running back that could sustain offense. So I'm less worried about that. The biggest question in my mind about the Dallas backfield is Javonte Williams is a good pass protector. Jaden Blue, as of right now, doesn't project to be that. So does Dallas go with the guy that gives him more upside out of the backfield in the passing game, or do they go with the pass protector to keep Dak from getting hurt? And that's the $1 million question, but it's really a $50 question because I don't think either one produces a lot.
I heard you say on another podcast that you think Brian Schottenheimer will end up looking good this year, probably more so because of his personnel will make him look good as opposed to anything that he does. His scheme's making him look good. How do you see that manifesting itself?
Oh, yeah. Brian Schottenheimer is going to come out looking gold here because I don't think he's a good coach at all, but they're going to trail. And Dak Prescott, now, if you believe in voodoo, 2021, 2019, 2020, all those odd number of years, Dak's the quarterback 2, the quarterback 3, and the quarterback 7. Nice voodoo thing going on there. And the even number of years, he either misses half the year, throws a ton of interceptions, or a handful of both. But that said, their defense isn't going to be great. They're going to have to score. They can't sustain the run game. They'll have no choice but to pass. Bringing George Pickens in, opens things up. You can't really sell out completely on CeeDee Lamb because Pickens gets over the top. Jake Ferguson, very athletic tight end. In the 7 games with Dak last year, 3 of them he hit 70 yards. It's huge. Dak has always loved throwing to the tight end. So I think as long as they can stay healthy, it's going to be wheels up because they're going to have to throw 35 to 40 times a game because they will not run the ball.
So you touched on this when you were summing things up here. And not that it really matters, but is this year going to be the Javonte Williams show in Dallas? And the reason I'm going to ask that is because he's talking about how his knee feels better than it has at any point since the injury. So most fantasy managers already know that Jaden Blue has great speed and could be a mismatch mismatch weapon in the passing game, but do we have any confidence in him being anything more than that? So I guess, is it the Williams show because it has to be, or will it be the Blue show at some point because Williams is going to be that bad?
My mind tells me the pass protection is going to be important, especially with Dak's injury history, that they're going to need Javonte to come in and to pick things up. Defenses are going to know this team is not profiling as a run team, so they are probably going to do one of two things. Either put extra bodies, dime defense, a couple more defensive backs in the game, or they're going to send bodies at Dak. And if they do that, you've got to keep them upright. And you've got to allow plays to develop. So I would think Javonte Williams has the leg up, but this just screams committee. And I could even see Phil Maffa getting some like bruiser carries if he makes a squad, of course, 6th-round pick. But he's just a bruiser running back. But they might need a little of that. They might need an occasional, and Miles Sanders, forget it. Week 18 was beautiful last year, but done there. But so I think Javonte has the leg up for volume, but I think it's going to be a maddening committee. I'm not touching either of those in fantasy.
That's all I have. You have anything, JJ? Anything else you want to ask?
No, he answered my question about Pickens. I was wondering about his usage and what he was going to be able to open up for CD. Let's go to Detroit. We'll keep on moving.
All right. So let's see. Detroit. So the things that stand out to me on this specific chart is that Detroit, I think, as Jim noted before, was a heavy 12 personnel team. So you can see here that they were slightly below league average, about 6.5% below league average in 11 personnel. And again, I don't want to pretend like our viewers aren't knowledgeable. That's 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers, 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 receivers. So it makes sense what we know about Ben Johnson, that he would go 12 personnel. And like Jim said in the Chicago summary, that it didn't matter that it was Brock Wright. They were still 12 heavy 12 personnel, significantly heavier, almost 10.5% more so. The other things, and there's a few other things that stand out to me about this. Jared Goff's deep accuracy showed itself off, and not only that, but the low percentage, only 8%, a little over 8% of his attempts were 20 yards down the field. And then I don't know how much of this was the Houston Texans game where he threw 5 interceptions, but a lot of his medium passing was not what you would expect Jared Goff to be, at least in that offense. Lastly, the thing that stood out to me the most about Detroit here was probably the heavy difference between zone and man. 57% zone runs versus 32 man runs, 19 zone TDs versus 9 man TDs, and the yards per carry, 5.4 is the zone, 4.1 for man. So what do you think John Morton means, or where does John Morton take this offense, Jim?
The first thing I always worry about is John Morton is what I call, he has no legitimate NFL coaching experience. Fine, you were your coordinator. I mean, you were you're in a minor role. You weren't calling plays. You weren't setting things up. And we're going from Ben Johnson. One of the beauties of Ben Johnson, he knew perfectly what to get out of Jared Goff. He knew how to stack play calls. He knew how to keep the defense on their heels. As soon as John Morton's in there, I'm going to roll back the offense. Well, good luck, because it's all the in-game play calls when the defense adjusts to you, and that's why I have no expectations. But JJ and Doug, the biggest thing I see, Frank Ragnow, the center, retired. And so now you have a left guard called Christian Mahogany. I know they had some hopes for him. Right guard Tate Ratledge. Center now Graham Glasgow is going to play there. This is not the Lions' offensive line that we have seen the last few years. They still got Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell on the tackles, so they're beautiful there. But this line may not be as devastating. Fortunately, like you said, they're going to play that extra tight end that will help, and they have Gibbs and Montgomery. So I think even if the line takes a hit, I think both can still navigate it. But I think the biggest problem is that interior pressure and obvious pass downs could be a problem. Last thing I'll say, the Lions had an identity, and I call this preseason, but it fell apart. I said they were going to play great defense, and they were going to run the ball, and they weren't going to throw. And from weeks 3 through 7, we saw it. Jared Goff was throwing 25 or fewer passes a game. Sam Laporta was getting 2.8 targets per game. Jamison Williams getting 2 targets a game because they weren't passing. Well, they had 18 over the course of time. They had 18 season-ending injuries on defense, and that whole script went away. Roll it back to my call from last year. It's going to be a top 10 defense. They're going to run the ball. They are not throwing the ball much here because that's not what Dan Campbell wants.
JJ?
So I guess, Scott asks the question in the chat, do we think that the offense as a whole is going to take a step back without Ben Johnson?
I think it has to, because as I said earlier, it was the setup and the stacking of the plays. It was keeping Jared Goff comfortable. It was foreseeing how defenses would attack Goff, and they couldn't always protect him. I remember like that San Francisco game in the second half in the playoffs a couple of years back, how they just, all of a sudden just sent the house at him, and Jared Goff is Jared Goff. And when that happened, he fell apart. But with that interior line problem, not having the schemed up plays, the trickery that sometimes kept defense up bounds, that's all gone. They can say they're going to do it, but it's in practice. Really, John Morton's not going to have that level of understanding how to flip the switches. So no, I think it's going to be a hit on the offense, but I think they have so much talent. They're going to score points. The running backs are going to be fine. It's going to look weird some weeks, but they got too much talent not to score 27 points a game.
And I don't think it's the most important thing, but everything that Jim said, plus what I'm going to say here, one of the things that new play callers have to learn, and it's not just something that you can watch and hope to absorb, is play sequencing. It is part having the creativity and just having good personnel. It's also knowing when to call something. So that's I think that's going to be a rough go, regardless of, it wouldn't matter if his name was Ben Johnson or John Morton. I think it's one of those things that it's going to take, I don't know, half a season. It might take half a season. We may not see the typical Detroit offense all year, but who knows? But I have a couple questions here for you, Jim, as far as Detroit's concerned. The general sense I'm getting from Detroit is that Morton wants to keep things the same as much as possible. But all the talk about Jameson Williams' season essentially makes me think that Goff will be throwing deep a little bit more often. Either that or Amon-Ra St. Brown is about to get more competition on medium targets. What thoughts do you have?
Well, put it this way. Jared Goff had to be manipulated to be able to get deep passes. He's not a good downfield passer, but if you protect him right and you scheme things up and you set the defense on their heels, John Morton's not going to be able to do that. The interior line, like I said, the shuffling in the interior line. And I know the Mahogany played some last year, but that's going to be a problem. And Jared Goff, once he's uncomfortable, he's going to look to get out of dodge with the ball. So they could scheme Williams into space quickly and use him that way. But this talk about the deep game, once the bullets are flying, that's going to be done, because Jared Goff's going to throw 2 bad picks early in the season, or he's going to take some bad sacks and they're going to be like, oh, scrap that one. So in theory, it's really nice. And you have this great explosive player in Jameson Williams, but I just do not see this working. And it was hit or miss last year. He'd have the big plays would hit on occasion, but it was always, like you said, Doug, it was within play sequencing. It was set up to throw the defense off. And I cannot expect a new play caller to have that level.
Yeah, totally agree.
Speaking of bullets flying, Anja just wanted to remind us about your guns. All right, Ange, calm down now.
Was this gratuitous?
Jim, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Get up.
It was a line from the Hulk in Avengers Endgame. I know it's gratuitous, but rip the shirt off. Oh, too good.
Anything else about Detroit, Doug?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking. What more? I'm glad. What more can Morton do for Gibbs and Montgomery that Johnson didn't already do? And also, how fearful are we that the turnover at center and right guard will greatly impact Montgomery? And the reason I ask Montgomery is because Montgomery is going to be more of your interior pounder as opposed to Gibbs. Gibbs can run inside too, obviously, but he's more of the explosive threat, so I think he would be less affected by the guard center combination.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, because if the Lions aren't able to formulate a downfield passing attack because they lack confidence in Jared Goff or the protection, that means defenses will creep in a little bit. And again, with an interior line potential issue, more bodies in the box. Obviously, do the math, and that's not a good equation. David Montgomery probably does take a hit here, but I still know. Look, and I know it was with the former coach Ben Johnson, but this running back interior grinder has been good for about 17 touchdowns roughly a season since the Jamal Williams days a few years back. Montgomery's going to get his touchdowns, but I think the yardage does take it. And he went from 4.6 to 4.2 yards per carry last year. That was a little bit interesting. He is starting to age a bit. He's taken a lot of physical type carries in his career. I think Montgomery, though, I still think he gets enough volume because that defense is going to be really good. There are going to be issues, like you said, Doug, with the blocking, but I think Montgomery's good enough. I think they'll be able to get enough bodies in the blocking him. I think he will perform for fantasy, but from an NFL standpoint, yeah, I think you're going to see a yardage drop from Montgomery, but the ADP you're getting, right, it's outside of running back 20, like running back 22. I think Montgomery is still a value play for fantasy because he is going to get you 15 touchdowns.
I have nothing else, JJ. You do? Do you?
I do not. And although I don't want to say it, should we go to the Texans?
Well, Jim can put his guns aside. I can handle this one. No, please. Okay, so what stands out to me about the Texans from last year, and I've heard Jim talk about this, and so some of the questions I have are going to be pointed toward what I've already heard Jim say. But anyway, things that stand out to me about this graphic here were probably the almost 10% difference in 12 personnel usage. And I think we know why that is. And I'll ask about it, Jim. So you'll probably get to it before I ask about it. But anyway, 12 personnel, significantly heavier than the league average. Deep passing for C.J. Stroud. The thing that stood out to me, 4 touchdowns versus 7 interceptions. The completion rate was about, I guess, what you would expect for a deep pass, but still 4 touchdowns versus 7 interceptions is not what you're looking for. And then going over to the run splits, the thing that stood out to me the most, well, I guess you could say that the zone percentage versus the man percentage was significant. That almost a 20% difference there, but zone TDs 10 and man TDs 4. Success rate was about the same for both. So anyway, go ahead and run with it, Jim.
The offensive line was abysmal last year. They traded away Laramie Tunsil, their left tackle, their best lineman. I'm very concerned. I don't even care about the scheme at this point because the block is so pitiful. But all that said, it's Nick Chubb season. Nick Chubb is healthy. And I'm telling you, Joe Mixon, the great compiler, you always get 3.9 to 4.1 yards per carry, regardless of the situation. And Nick Chubb may be making $5 million a year. The minute Chubb shows he's healthy, he is exponentially better than Mixon. We'll see where the ADP falls for Chubb. It's still a new signing. But Chubb's going to go after Mixon, and that's going to be a mistake. But I want to point out something. Last year, unfortunately, I predicted the demise of C.J. Stroud, and here's why. As a rookie, why was he successful? Because Bobby Slowick was able to use the 49er scheme. They used fullbacks, heavy personnel. Defenses always had to creep a defender in the box. The downfield passes, average depth of target, super high. Success rate, super high. Well, what did they do in the offseason last year? Brought in Stephon Diggs, fired their fullbacks. They went 3 receiver sets. Defenses put the shell up top. And guess what? The offensive line was bad, and C.J. Stroud paid the price. But here's what I'm thinking about C.J. Stroud. He showed star quality as a rookie. He learned a lot last year. I believe in the talent. I believe it's going to overcome the coaching. And I believe that Stroud makes his adjustment to the league this year. And with the weapons he has now, and I like Christian Kirk. I think he's a good addition for 1 year. Jalen Noel and, oh my God, Higgins, Jaden Higgins.
Sure.
Yeah, it's going to be a good bounce back year for Stroud. You're getting me a quarterback 18, but I believe his talent is real. And again, he was put in a bad spot last year. He overcomes it this year.
Totally agree. And one of the things when I was summing up the last year, reason I spent so much time on 12 personnel is I think that was Bobby Slowick's counter, I guess, against not having a fullback. So
Right.
try to load up, and it didn't work, obviously, but that was him trying, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Right. So like you, I think one of the downfalls of last year's offense was under Bobby Slowick was the front office cutting the fullbacks from the roster. While we know Caley comes from an offense that leans on 12 person or 11 personnel. Is Houston any more equipped to handle adversity this year?
So you mentioned Nick Caley, and before I get to the dealing with the adversity, I want to point out Sean McVay tree, but all of the Sean McVay disciples are not created equal. We got like Zach Robinson, similar to McVay in that he ran a ton of 3 receiver sets, 86% last year. McVay had been years ago as high as 96%, but Liam Cohen only ran 71%. So of 3 receiver sets. Zach Taylor, 60%. So all of these disciples of McVay, they're not created equal. And it's very interesting to see how some of them have had differing levels of success by doing things differently. The one thing they like to do is optimize their personnel to get the most out of them. If your guy can't block, don't make him block. And there's that. But Nick Caley is just like John Morton in that he has no serious coaching experience. And so again, but I am going to double back on CJ Stroud's superstar ability that we're going to see back there. He's going to make the plays. He has Nico Collins for however many games he plays. He has those other receivers I mentioned, Nick Chubb or Joe Mixon. They're going to have weapons. The line's going to be a problem, but I think CJ Stroud is going to be able to overcome. And remember, those 2 playoff games ran for 42 yards in each game. He opened that up. He had not been a runner. This is a different part of the game that they can at least tap into as well. So I think that they're going to overcome the coach because the coach is not going to be a strength. But I believe the talent and the skill positions can handle that.
So my second question for you here, I just penned and had published my offensive line article for the AFC. And in there, among other things, I said that Houston, like you, Jim, Houston had one of the worst offensive lines, if not the worst offensive line last year. This year's team could be even worse in terms of. So I know what you said about Stroud, and I'm with you. I think Stroud will be better simply because he's not going to be throwing to Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie, and company, and Dalton Schultz. Those aren't when injuries happen. Those aren't going to be the guys he's throwing to. They're legitimately 4 deep at receiver right now, and you could say probably more so than that. But this is a long way to asking. Given your optimism on Stroud, given the depth at receiver, does the offensive line ruin everything in Houston this year?
It probably does. They bring in Trent Brown. He's often injured. He's average. It could help at the right tackle. Titus Howard's going to play guard this year, and we'll see if that works. He's played a lot of tackle. We'll see if that works out. But no, I'm not optimistic. I'm not. Cam Robinson's at left tackle. Again, maybe adequate. It's going to be an issue, but Nick Caley, again, I'm not optimistic, but I think they'll figure out enough to say they probably got to put Stroud in the shotgun. They probably don't have any other option than that. And they have these receivers, and we don't know what the 2 rookies are going to be. But Kirk has been productive when he gets the ball. And Nico Collins is a superstar. So I think they're going to go gun, and I think they're just going to let the talent, as I said earlier, the skill positions dictate. If Nick Chubb is healthy, regardless of the offensive line, he is still going to make things happen because the Texans are going to force defenses to play to high shell again. So I think this could all work out. It's not going to be pretty from a series to series situation early in the season, but I think the more chemistry they get together, they can overcome the line.
So in your typical redraft league, Jim, which wide receivers would you be willing to take?
It's Kirk. He's cheap. You get him well outside the top 50, maybe even around top number 60 at wide receiver right now. Nico Collins, look, I've loved him since his rookie year. He just can't stay on the field. He misses way too much time. And if I'm going to take a wide receiver 7 or 8 price tag on him, and there's like significant injuries, I can't do that. I can't use my second pick on him because of that. And he had that 1,297 yard season a couple of years ago. His targets are never super high. I want to say, top of my head, he had like 112 targets that season. So he doesn't even see like extreme alpha level volume. He's so good, he makes it happen on less. But now you're talking less games, and now if there's other receivers and those targets even take a tiny dip, it's just too much concern. When I could get him in the 3rd or 4th round back, year or 2 ago, great. Early 2nd round, I can't do it.
All right, Doug, let's go to Jacksonville.
All right. I think a lot of us are pretty excited about this. I'm just going to wind Jim up and let him go on after I talk about maybe 15, 20 seconds here. The things that stood out to me when I was with this graphic, if you look at the medium passing, you certainly want a higher completion rate than 48.5% on targets 10 to 19 yards, 2 to 3 touchdown to interception ratio. And I guess the other thing that kind of stood out to me was the difference in man runs versus zone runs. Significantly heavier man percentage, 49% versus basically 35% for Jacksonville. So that was Doug Peterson, or at least the Doug Peterson influence. You've already kind of talked about what Liam Cohen is going to do, or what the Sean McVay disciples do in terms of catering to their personnel. But like I said, I'll just wind you up and go with Liam Cohen here.
Yeah, so Liam Cohen, it's a drastically different situation than he had in Tampa Bay. That Tampa Bay offense on the tackles were great. Baker Mayfield had time to throw. He could check to a second read if he wanted, third if you need to. He could run. The interior line was good enough. The motion that he used, the stacking of the plays, as you call it, the play sequencing, it was an orchestra. And you had a Hall of Famer in Mike Evans, and for half the season, Chris Godwin, who's playing at a stratospheric level. Now you go to Jacksonville, and Cohen's going to have some really nice concepts here. The offensive line, maybe best day average. I don't think it's average. I think it's like number 20 in my mind. Not a good offensive line. They have uncertainty at running back. They're saying, oh, we'll give ETN the shot, but 36 percentile broken tackle rate. Yards after contact were terrible last year. That's not working. Bigsby, fine for a grinder. Bring in Bashal Tootin, straight line runner only. So good luck with that. So I think it's going to be an issue. And then you get the quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. He had that flash a few years ago when they made the playoffs in the second half. He doesn't have 25 touchdowns in the season. You could blame Press Taylor. But at some point, if you're a superstar, you'll make it happen. Brian Thomas, right? He'll be the focal point of the offense. But remember this, who gave all the production to Brian Thomas Jr.? It was Mac Jones. Those last 6 games, it was off the charts number. With Trevor Lawrence, he had 3 games under 6 PPR points, inconsistent targeting. I don't think Trevor Lawrence is a good decision maker. I think Liam Cohen is going to do the best he can, but I think he's dealing with a flawed quarterback, a flawed offensive line, a flawed running game, and the last thing, Travis Hunter. He's going to be great, but he still moves like a cornerback. He has a lot to learn about route running. He could get away with that in college because he was against college kids. So, and Brian Thomas Jr., if you can't get Trevor Lawrence to hyper target him like Mac Jones did, I'm concerned. Cohen's great, but I think he really has a bag of tools that aren't great.
Wow.
I was on I did a pod with Drew Davenport last night talking about rookies in redraft, and he asked who I was avoiding. And one of my avoids is Travis Hunter, mainly because of Trevor Lawrence. And Trevor Lawrence has never been able to sustain 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers. And where Travis Hunter is going, it doesn't make any sense to me. So what do you see as an upside for Travis Hunter this year?
700 yards.
Ooh.
700 yards. That's it. Again, he is going to have a wake-up call this year. He's going to be great. He is going to be great. But if his footwork is sloppy and he's trying to beat NFL corners, it's not going to fly this year. It really isn't. And Trevor Lawrence, I said earlier, poor decision maker. If he sees something and he doesn't like it, he immediately checks off it. And I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains. And maybe Travis Hunter is much better in the second half of the season. That's firmly in play. But I don't see him as a 1,000-yard receiver. I see him as a 700-yard receiver. He will be a 1,100-yard receiver down the road, just not now.
Yeah, wow.
You completely disagree. I want to hear it, Doug.
No. I'm with you. I'm with you for. I'm a little surprised by the Lawrence take, but I completely understand where you're going with it. And I've been saying this since JJ and I were doing the draft shows. I've had Tech McMillan and had Travis Hunter the whole time. My confidence has wavered a time or two, but thankfully I haven't had any rookie drafts yet. But that's neither here nor there. I might come around back to Lawrence here. I'm just a little bit surprised by your take, but I hate to even call it take. I'm surprised by your analysis, but I agree with it. That makes sense. So is there any chance, given what we know about Colm and the personnel, is there any chance that this is not an 80% 11 personnel team this year?
They have no choice but to go that route.
That's what I think.
Their personnel doesn't dictate otherwise. They're going to have to spread to give more up because he's going to want to get creative, Liam Cohen, with the run game. And if something sticks, hey, it's in play. I'm betting against it. Travis Etienne could have a revival. He's had really bad coaching. The broken tackle rate and yards after contact and even yards after the catch were horrible last year. But if he reconnects to that, he could be a real weapon. So if that happens, now all of a sudden you're looking at spread offense and 11 personnel. And if ETN gets going, now all of a sudden there might be a little more gas to cook with. But what I saw last year, I'm very nervous about it.
Follow up to that, unless JJ, did you want to add anything? Okay. I'll follow up to that question then. I think we can pretty much pencil in De'Ami Brown as a mostly perimeter receiver. Do you envision Travis Hunter or Brian Thomas seeing most of the slot work, or do you see either one of them like monopolizing the slot work, or do you see them splitting it pretty evenly?
It's a good question. And I think Cohen is not going to pigeonhole any one player in any one spot. I think he's going to try to use deception and matchups to try to gain advantages, try to get Lawrence some easier looks. And I think that would be by moving receivers around. So I do think, as you're intimating, it will be pretty much across the board split up. There will be no dominant slot receiver. They each could see in the 30 to 40% range, and then shaking out the details of who finishes ahead of who.
Final question for you. You kind of already touched on the running back situation multiple times. What's your take on it? How do you see that playing out?
Bigsby's 213 pounds. He had a really good broken tackle rate, I believe 90th percentile. His yards after contact were in the 80-something percentile range. He's not a great running back. He's 213, but he's their big back. And I think if they're running 3 receiver sets, that 11 personnel, then I think there's some lighter boxes. And I think that he could be a part of the solution as their bigger back, because I don't think ETN is going to get this massive workload. And they've always shown as an organization to keep, once they do give them work, they cut that down. So I think like Bigsby is not going to have this huge season, but I think at cost being the cheapest piece of the backfield, I think that's the one you want to take your chance on in fantasy. Again, like I said earlier, if you're betting on Travis Etienne rekindling the magic of like 3 years ago, then go ahead and bet on him because he will smash ADP. But again, what I saw last year, I have a hard time betting on that.
Yeah, makes sense. That's all I have for Jacksonville. Do you have anything, JJ?
No, that's it. Let's finish up this first half of the pod with the Seahawks.
Oh, the Seahawks. Oh, boy. Well, let me move on down here. So, yeah, I think as I'm looking at it here, the thing that probably jumps out to me the most last year with the personnel, 11 personnel, was almost 77% of the time, which, again, league average being 60%, I'm actually surprised the league average is that low. But anyway, we're talking about a 16% increase or 16% difference from the league average there. Moving over to the passing breakdown, I guess probably the thing that jumps out to me if I copied this information right was the 2 interceptions behind the line of scrimmage and 95% completion otherwise. So that's neither here nor there. I think the part about Seattle, and I'm interested to get Jim's input on Seattle because there's one particular player that I think is going to break out, even not break out, but perform so much better than he already did last year. But the run split I'll point out here that probably jumps out to me the most, the splits that jump out to me the most here were the 11-man touchdown runs versus 3 zone touchdown runs, and the 5 point yards per carry per man versus 3.3 yards per carry per zone. So that's what I have. Jim, take that whatever direction you want to go.
So the 3 receiver sets, those are done because Clint Kubiak was 33% 3 receiver usage last year in New Orleans. Now, I know they had injuries, all right? I get that, but those numbers were low all along. What Clint Kubiak wanted to do was he wanted to get as much protection in. He wanted to use his quarterback on rollouts and boots. And actually, it worked perfectly for Derek Carr in those first 2 games because Rashid Shaheed was running downfield. Carr, when he gets loose, and he threw a couple under pressure passes. I want to take all the credit away from him, but it was perfect for those 2 games. Well, they ran obviously heavy personnel 63% of the time. So Sam Darnold's going to need that. They're going to need to load up as many bodies. Again, you can't get pressure on Sam Darnold because we saw it in the games in which he played in Minnesota and they faced teams that could pressure. He was the complete polar opposite of the successful quarterback he was. So here's what we're going to see. And you were talking earlier about Kenneth Walker's where he wanted to go with the running game. And so we're going to see the zone runs. And remember last year, though, Alvin Kamara was the running back 1 through like 3 weeks last year. And then all of a sudden in their 4th game, their opponent said, oh, I see what they're doing. They put a 5th defensive lineman in. And all of a sudden there was nothing. There was no counter punch all year. It was like the cheat code to Clint Kubiak's running game. And that film is out. And if Clint Kubiak doesn't have a counter punch for that, Kenneth Walker is going to be in the same situation he's always been. See, Kenneth Walker could break tackles all day long, but his yards after contact are like 38th percentile last year. It's terrible. So he breaks tackles, but doesn't do a whole lot with it. Caught a lot of passes last year. He's always that guy. We always see the flashes of the talent, and we always think, man, this guy could be a top 10 running back. Every year, he finishes worse than his ADP. This year, going as a running back 16. Well, he's never had better than the running back 18 finish. And I know there were injuries, so maybe he gets the full season. But at the end of the season, Zach Charbonnet started looking pretty good. And at the end of the season, all of a sudden, instead of 2-3 carries a game, we saw Charbonnet getting a few more carries. This could be a little more of a committee than we think. But to your point, if Kubiak can come up with a counter punch to what defense has solved about his running game last year, Kenneth Walker could get turned loose. He has a lot of talent. There's no question. The last thing, they're already talking about Cooper Kupp looking good in the slot, and they need Jackson Smith and Jigba there because those are easy throws. He can still win outside, but man, we love him in the slot. But I think Cooper Kupp's done anyway. So I think if they start with that, he's not going to be able to do what he did. So I think eventually JSN sees 160 targets this year.
Okay. So my first question here would be, I heard you talk, I believe it was with our guest last week, Theo Grimminger, about this, but you could correct me if it was a different pod. But so I think both you and I know that Sam Darnold is not a great deep passer, and it's not going. Whatever happened with Derek Carr, and the reason I bring up Derek Carr is because obviously Clint Kubiak was with the Saints last year, but what happened with Derek Carr and the Saints last year is they were hitting deep shots on a fairly regular basis. And in fact, Rashid G took what was supposed to be a very much a complimentary role and was become every week starter until he got hurt. Mm-hmm. So my question for you here is, if Darnold is not a deep passer, now granted, Seattle doesn't have exactly deep personnel. I mean, outside of, I guess, Torrey Holton, but
and Valdez-Scantling.
And Valdez-Scantling, but how easy do you think the transition is for Kubiak, or how do you see this playing out well for Kupp and JSN, that he can transition that quickly from a primarily play action vertical shot team to a more short intermediate passing game?
The problem the Seahawks are going to have is they have no receiver that scares past the intermediate level. JSN's an underneath guy. Kupp's obviously a short area guy. Nobody is afraid of Marcus Valdez-Scantling. He's a big downfield guy, but he's not fast. Nobody's ever going to commit a safety to him. And Horton, like you said, maybe he gets a roll. Maybe nobody strikes fear deep. So I think teams are going to approach Seattle and Clint Kubiak where send as many bodies down as you can. Maybe it's 9. Maybe it's 9 sometimes. And you just gum up the middle of the field and you make Sam Darnold make mistakes. And I think that's what I intimated earlier, the running game. That's going to be a problem because we said last year, you put 5 defensive linemen against this rushing attack, and it struggled. And I think we're going to see a lot of that because teams are going to have the luxury to do that because there is nobody putting fear into defense.
Okay, now moving over to the running game then. Now, well, I can take this in a few ways. I won't go with the expanded question here. So put it this way. So I believe, was it Abraham Lucas that missed a lot of games last year? I think Cross played a lot, but Lucas didn't.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. So how much do you think his, let's say he plays 15 games or whatever, and then bring in Gray Zabel, how much do you think that may overcome the book being out on Kubiak's zone run scheme or outside zone run scheme? And does that change? Should that change fantasy managers' opinions on what Walker can do? Or I'm sorry, or is the change up just running more with Charbonnet in between the tackles?
Their center and their right guard project to be bad. Anthony Bradford, terrible at right guard. Oluwatimi at center, it does not project to be good. This is a line that Gray Zabel might probably hits. It looks like he's a very promising prospect coming in. So, but Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross had that great rookie season, but ever since, they haven't been great players. They've been good. So there's nothing at all special about the line. And like I said earlier, defenses are going to overload the front area. So that's going to put even more pressure on the offensive line. These running backs are going to make it happen on their own. And quite honestly, the one who could have a better chance of making it on his own is actually Zach Charbonnet because of the power element. Like I said earlier, Kenneth Walker breaks tackles all day long, but he doesn't do anything after it. And so that's a bit of a problem.
I don't have anything else, JJ.
I do not either. And before we get to the second half, Diehards, let's be honest, Dynasty Leagues are where the real fantasy legends are made. Redraft is fun, sure, but Dynasty, that's for us. The Dynasty Football World Championships are back for their 13th season, and this is your chance to build your squad from the ground up and chase the crown. Whether you're a savvy vet or a startup junkie, there's a league waiting for you. Drafts start at just $75 with higher stakes options available. Visit dynastyking.com and search for the Dynasty Football World Championship. Your dynasty glory starts today. Now, gentlemen, the autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. Let's go to Las Vegas. Doug?
Oh, Vegas. All right. Actually, in looking for big differences here, and let's face it, Chip Kelly is going to come in and he's going to probably have a dramatically different take than what we're used to seeing with the Raiders. So, again, this is one of those where I'm just going to jump up and go. The thing that stood out to me the most was the 12 personnel usage. Last year, that was over a third of the snaps, which is, I think that's Detroit level, actually. Actually, they're a little bit higher than Detroit. But the other thing, and this is Gardner Minshew versus Geno Smith. Of course, we're talking about two different quarterbacks here, but I did find it interesting that Gardner Minshew only attempted 7.2% of his passes were 20 yards down the field. Jim, run with Chip Kelly as much as you want here.
Yeah, I'll say this. I always have issues with these college coaches that come into the NFL because in college, they always have either better players or better scheme in their play. They don't have to change a game plan all year long. They can run it for 15 weeks and it has the same level of success no matter who they play. But when these college coaches hit the NFL, adjustments are made from week one. Now, Chip Kelly had that 1 year where they ran at a breakneck pace and it took the league a while to figure that one out. But once they did, he was done. Then he had that 1 year in San Francisco. Terrible. So I really don't think he has the capability of coaching an NFL offense and making adjustments. That said, offensive line is decent. And Geno Smith, professional quarterback. The receiving weapons, again, they're not going to scare anybody. And the same problem with Seattle is they don't really have a true vertical threat. Trey Tucker's, I care less. No vertical threat. So again, defense could pack things down. Crowd up the field. It's going to be tougher for Geno Smith. Ashton Genty will get all the work he can handle, 3-down skill set. But Chip Kelly on his own, the needle doesn't move because, again, I just don't think he can make adjustments. But we do know this with head coach Pete Carroll, even if they get behind and that defense is not going to be very good, they're going to run as much as they can. They're going to try to shorten games. They're going to run as often as they can, keep it as close as possible. So I do think this is a very heavy run-based team, but there's games they're going to, especially in the second half, they're going to have to throw because they're going to be trailing.
All right, Jim, are there any any wide receivers outside of Jacoby Myers who you would be eyeing up in redraft?
Jack Besh is a hot name, a second-round draft pick. I wonder how much he can really separate at the NFL level. Maybe he's, you never know with these guys that he's an outside receiver, but he could move to the slot. And maybe he's one of those guys that just has that knack for getting open and it becomes a great thing. But ultimately, I think he might have a little bit of a learning curve. And I think Geno Smith is going to get really comfortable throwing to Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers because they are both not only super reliable, they're where they need to be. And they both are very, very good at making sure they move the chains. So I think they're going to just dominate the targets. Jack Besh will have a couple of good games, but I think the target share, we're going to see a lot of 2 and 3 catch games out of them. You'll get a few 5 and 6 here and there. I don't think enough to make him a fantasy target. But I wouldn't, if somebody in the audience is hot on Jack Besh, I wouldn't rule it out either, because if he's that guy that just has that knack for getting open and second half game scripts could be, ball going over the field, you could make a case for Besh. So I won't completely stonewall him out, but I'm not optimistic.
What's your opinion on Besh's skill set being basically similar to Myers, and then I think Myers' contract runs out at the end of the year. Was he a pick for 2026, or do you think he's actually a pick for 2025?
They really don't have a number 2 receiver. And it is interesting because the Raiders never do a traditional draft, no matter who the general manager or owner is, never makes a difference. So it was one of those head scratchers because they really did need a deep threat. And this is a team that would Darius Hayward Bay way back in the day, draft speed. And I know everything's different now and Tom Brady's in the house, but like you said, it's kind of a redundant skill set, and Myers is so polished and he's been so good at it. So maybe it is a 2026 pick, but they really need somebody on the field in 2025. It's not like Pete Carroll's 40 years old,
2 more questions. I think these the first one can be a short one here. So Geno Smith being in Vegas now, we can expect more deep balls. We saw 7.2% last year from Gardner Minshew. I would expect that to be 13-14% with Smith, assuming, and I'm going to lead into why that I think that could be, but that's going to depend on what your answer to this question. Do we have any faith in Deontay Thornton or Trey Tucker stretching the field?
Trey Tucker, no. He had his opportunity last year. Honestly, he's probably like a number 7 receiver on a team, number 6 receiver. So the issue with that. And in terms of Thornton, it's really hard to push a 4th round draft pick and say, you're going to be our guy. Could it happen? Yes. Not counting on it.
Okay. My last question, we surprisingly didn't talk at all about Ashton Jeanty yet. What can Kelly do, if anything, to help him out? Because like you said, I think there's going to be more, the box count is going to not be in his favor a lot. So what can Kelly do to help him out?
I imagine they'll get him into space as a receiver. So I imagine he's going to get a lot of volume, and volume's king in fantasy football. And again, the line is decent. The line is a little above average for run blocking. So I'm okay there. I just think between the volume, he's probably going running back 4 in a lot of drafts. To me, I'd rather have him at running back 6. So I'd rather have Derrick Henry, who goes later than him, because I know the floor. And so with Jeanty, it's not the talent. I just think there's going to be a lot of attention on him and a lot of bodies. So I think he has a very good season. I just don't know if it's a running back 4 season.
I tend to agree with you. Yeah. And
all right,
I didn't give it much thought, but yeah, I'd much rather have Henry. I'd much rather have Henry than Jeanty. I didn't give that much thought because I haven't drafted anything yet, but that makes a ton of sense.
All right, let's go to New England.
So only 2 things really stuck out to me here as I was reviewing the horror that was last year's Patriots, but huge, heavy, not quite as heavy as Vegas, but heavy 12 personnel again, almost 10% more than the league average. And then I guess I found it interesting that as we look to Drake May and his passing in the medium intermediate part of the field, 10 to 19 yards, only 51% completion, which we could probably chalk up to a lack of quality options outside of Hunter Henry. And then he had a 4 to 5 touchdown to interception ratio. Other than that, it was pretty decent, pretty much similar across the board. I guess you could point out that they ran man blocking about 47% of the time versus 34% for zone, but and the success rates were about the same. But anyway, what does Josh McDaniels do that wasn't happening last year?
Well, we know Josh McDaniels loves to have two tight ends on the field, 12 personnel. And I think this is going to be good for the young quarterback, Drake May. I think, again, that extra body and protection, but also leak out tight ends. And Austin Hooper caught his share of passes last year, right? Henry was great, but Hooper was catching passes. And Stephon Diggs, we're already talking pup list for him. Seriously, 31 years old off a midseason ACL. Don't count on him till the second. If he's getting drafted fairly aggressively, he may not even be a factor. Anyway, that said, two tight end sets, very controlled passing game. They're going to probably split the running back, big back Ramondre Stevenson, second year of a 4-year deal at starter money. And then 205 pounds, Travion Henderson, probably going to get some early down work and a lot of passing down work. I think it's going to be a very, very friendly offense for May, not opening things up, just going to try to move the chains.
I'm going to take this in a different direction before circling back to the running game here. I have really started to – I've been looking for this for 3 years. Basically, since Demario Douglas came to the league and had a good rookie year, I've been waiting for him to follow up on that. We know that Josh McDaniels has quite the history with slot receivers and going back to Wes Welker. Any thoughts on where Douglas goes this year?
So the thought from camp early was that they want Diggs to be the slot. But now, I don't know when Diggs is going to be there. So Demario Douglas gets a chance to open the season. And like you said, in this two tight end offense, it's going to be safer passes. This could open up. I would draft Demario Douglas. He's like undrafted now. He was like wide receiver 70. He's like undrafted in the deep leagues now. So I would spend a wide receiver 75 pick on him. I think you get at least 4 weeks of good PPR production on him. If Diggs does come back healthy, I think that they said he's going to play slot, so Douglas might be out of work. But if you get 4 good weeks out of a player drafted that late, I'd be all over it. And again, Diggs may not return to health.
So let's say that Diggs misses the first 4 weeks of the season. Let's just say that's we can count on that. Are we okay? And then let's say he comes back in week 5. Are we pro Kyle Williams or are we Mac Hollins?
Oh, man. I'm Kayshon Boutte, and I know they're not even talking about him. Kayshon Boutte, the last 3 games, he had it was like 80-something yard game and a 100-yard game. He was getting some chemistry. Nobody noticed it because nobody was watching the Patriots at that point. But he was really good in the last 3 weeks, and he was a guy that was going to need some seasoning anyway. And Drake May, I think and nobody's talking about it, and maybe the Patriots don't even start him. Mac Hollins is a great blocker, and they may have very good use to have him as a blocker. But silly enough, I think Boutte is, again, undrafted, and most of you're going to have 20 team or 20 round draft.
Okay.
Maybe you spend a last round pick on Boutte. Kyle Williams, community split on him. I don't think he's a difference maker year one. I think he's a player to take a little time to acclimate, and I don't quite know he's going to be. But this year, I don't see him as a difference maker in fantasy.
Is the backfield as simple as Stevenson's the early down grinder and Henderson's the satellite back in the James White mold, or are we talking maybe second half? We're talking Stevenson's getting pretty much the short yardage and the goal line stuff, and Henderson's handling everything else.
Stevenson had a vast fumbling history and a major issue. He got benched twice for it last year, different coaching stuff. But if he starts putting the ball on the ground, Travion Henderson is take that backfield over soon. But there's no guarantee Stevenson goes back to fumbling. So, but that said, I do think the early season it's going to be the 29, 237 back. I'm lost the weight on him now. I had the weight earlier in my mind.
I think it's 220s in the 220s. I think it's
so Stevenson will start out the season as the early down grinder and then change of pace and receiving back will be Henderson. But again, if Stevenson is fumbling the ball, that could change in a heartbeat.
I don't have anything else to you, JJ.
I just see Travion Henderson as the James White to Josh McDaniels, which speaks very well for fantasy purposes because Josh loved James White. Let's go down to New Orleans.
All right. So I want to point your attention to the top left there because what I did when I was doing the research for this, any team that had more than 5% of usage in a personnel package made the chart. You see the Saints had 5 different personnel packages that made at least 5%. So, and then you look at what Clint Kubiak, the aforementioned Clint Kubiak did. So the highest rate was 11 personnel, which is not shocking, but he used it 33% of the time, which is almost half of what the league average was. So there was a wow, number one. Number two, we talked about the zone runs. Of course, he's with Seattle now. We talked about the zone runs versus the man runs. That was the other big difference that stood out to me. 263 zone runs under Kubiak last year versus 122 man runs. And, of course, the percentages, 59 were fast, 59% to basically 27, 28%. So we have Kellen Moore now in New Orleans. He's coming from the Eagles. What do we... From his experience with the Cowboys, from his experience with the Eagles and the Chargers, what do we expect now with the Saints that we didn't see last year with Kubiak?
Yeah, last year, Kellen Moore with the Eagles ran 3 receiver sets, 11 personnel, 62% of the time is 18th in the league. Here's the whole thing I'm going to say. Personnel, they have no choice but to go 2 tight ends as their base. You have Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, and right now they're both healthy. Hopefully it stays that way. Your number 3 is a probably over-the-hill Brandon Cooks. Number 4 is Bub Means. Kevin Austin's number 5. They can't roll those guys out there regularly. You're going to have to get Juwan Johnson, Foster Morrow out there to block a little bit. You're going to have to go 2 tight ends. They have no other choice. Their personnel is going to dictate that's their base. But that might be best if Tyler Shuck's the quarterback because you need to protect him and the extra body and protection. Use some play action, get the ball out quickly to Olave. Shaheed can't be the deep threat here. They're not going to have time. Shuck's probably not going to be the decision maker he needs to be for that. So that kind of caps Shaheed.
So, simple question. Who do we like in New Orleans then?
Look, Chris Olave is going as the wide receiver 30, and I can't predict injuries, and I know the concussion's been grisly, and I'm real salty with Derek Carr because both of those concussions last year, Carr threw Olave into the hit both times. That's Jimmy Garoppolo stuff, and that's why I remember you got George Kittle hurt once, and it's beautiful that Derek Carr's gone. Bye-bye, because now you can't get Chris Olave hurt because you're retired. So no offense, you're a professional quarterback, and I'm not, but you got your great receiver hurt. And I'm hoping Tyler Shuck can at least have the good sense not to lead him in the traffic. The concussions, to my mind, were Derek Carr's fault, both of them. So I'm going to bet on health from Chris Olave. Yes, the concussions are an issue. Olave, over his career, when he gets 6 targets or more in a game, almost every time he gets 81 or more yards. It's like a lock. Wide receiver 30, I'll take the injury risk. Give me Olave all day long. And Juwan Johnson's been the perennial, underused guy. They're going to have to use him more this year. He gets about 500 yards most seasons. They can get to the 650 range because they're going to have to use him. And I think he finally might get his chance.
Okay, so, yeah, we don't want injuries, obviously, but does Shaheed have it in his skill set to replace Olave if necessary?
They're so different. When Shaheed came in his rookie year, he came in like week 8 or so. Yeah. And when he first came in, there was the deep stuff. And then in the last 5 games, he was short and intermediate, and he was cooking. They got him going in a different role. So I do think Shaheed has a more refined skill set. But here's the problem. If Rashid Shaheed is cast into a number 1 role and sees number 1 coverage, and now he has a limited quarterback, that's where I have concerns. I think he could have a high floor if he had to replace Olave because he would get targets. But I really think if he had extra attention put on him and it wasn't where he could get deep, which I don't think he can in this offense, I think that's where I see the problem.
2 more questions, and you can make these as short or expanded as you want here. So you said that you thought New Orleans would be primarily a 12 personnel, or at least a more 12 personnel team than most teams, right?
I don't think they have a choice. Yeah.
So do you is this finally Juwan Johnson's breakout season, or is he going to lose production to probably Foster Moreau or Dallin Hooker or somebody like that?
Again, because I think they don't have receivers. They have to play two tight ends. And Juwan Johnson's he used to be a wide receiver back in the day. And he's a converted receiver. He's the pass catcher. Morrow can catch the ball, but he's a blocker. They need Morrow to be the blocker. And I don't think they have to overthink this one. And I think they're going to trail. The defense lost infrastructure. It's aging. Cam Jordan's 36 years old.
Yeah.
They're going to have to pass. They're going to trail. There's going to be volume. And so, yes, I think you get Juwan Johnson at tight end 30 or something like that. I think a tight end 20 finish is in the realm of possibility.
Last but not least, the Saints fantasy stud last year was Alvin Kamara, like it usually is. does Moore's arrival help or hinder him in any way, or is he going to finally start losing carries to, Devin Neal, Cam Akers?
Right? Yeah, they just signed Cam Akers. So here is the thing. The last 2 years, Alvin Kamara has had horrific broken tackle rate, yards after contact. Last year, 19th percentile yards after contact. But I say this, volume is king in fantasy football. But I will say this about Alvin Kamara. He's 30 this year. In the last 5 games last year, 3.7 yards per carry. Age is catching up. He did have solid scoring, but early in the season, remember, he's at 26 points per game in the first 3 games. In the last 5 games, he averaged 15 PPR points, which is fine. It's a good number, but I think another age-related decline is going to hit here. And I think at his ADP about running back 19, it's borderline. He may get enough volume to justify it, but he's missed time in 3 or 4 straight years now.
That's all I have, JJ. Anything?
No, let's talk about the Jets.
And Jim, you are reminded that this is a Jets podcast, even though I didn't want it to be one. It is a Jets podcast.
Well, this will be good then.
Yeah. So we have Tanner Engstrand coming in for the Jets, and I don't think this graphic is going to be much use to anybody as far as diagnosing what the 2025 Jets are going to be like. But the things that did stand out to me about last year's Jets, 70%, 11 personnel, which I guess not shocking because it was an Aaron Rodgers-led offense. And the other thing that probably stood out to me was the 55% zone run versus 36% man run. This year, and I'm sorry if I'm going to steal some of your analysis here. This year I'm going to expect RPO heavy offense, one read. Maybe you get around to Mason Taylor, but anyway, go for it.
Yeah, so like you said, RPO has to be the way. You brought in Justin Fields. You have no option. Last year, he was used on safe runs in Pittsburgh. This running quarterback had 1,143 yards with the Bears a few years back. So this is their best path, is to let him run and go with that. Leverage Breece Hall and others out of that RPO game. Could be Isaiah Davis, could be some Braylon Allen. Garrett Wilson will see all the targets he can handle. Remember, with Justin Fields in 2023, DJ Moore had 1,360 yards. So he can support a number 1 receiver. And better yet, guess what? Justin Fields could support a tight end. In 2023, Cole Kmet, career year, 710 plus yards, 6 touchdowns, 90 targets. Mason Taylor, pure pass catching tight end drafted in the 2nd round. Nope, he's going like the tight end 25 in drafts. Look, don't be surprised if Mason Taylor is the tight end 18 because Justin Fields can throw the ball to the middle of the field at a tight end.
One thing that stuck out to me as I was doing some research on Engstrand, I believe he came up as a college coach under Jim Harbaugh at San Diego. And then now his last few years have been with Detroit. I don't think this isn't so much a question as an observation. I don't think there's any chance that this isn't a run-heavy offense, especially when you consider what Engstrand came from. So as far as questions are concerned, so are we back in on Justin Fields?
You have to be. Tim Tebow. Every year I say this, and now it's getting older and older. When Tim Tebow started, he was a QB1. If you are a running quarterback and you're going to be using that capacity, which he almost has to be here, he is a serious threat as a quarterback 1. He's being drafted about quarterback 10. You take him there. And you take another quarterback, a quarterback 13 or 14. You take another one there to protect yourself in case he gets benched or if there's an issue. Justin Fields, as long as they're using him as a runner, how is he not a top 6 quarterback?
Agree. Moving over to running back now, I did read one of my jobs is I post news blurbs and updates and all that stuff for USA Today for Gannett. And something that stumbled upon during one of my shifts here last week was that Breece Hall didn't disclose that he had a knee injury. I guess that was not related to his ACL tear from a few years ago. So we wonder why Breece Hall didn't just explode last year. And I guess he was dealing with it most of the season, if you believe what he was saying. So how much do we buy in the possibility that this isn't still Breece Hall's backfield and they just have good backups, or do you see more being a potential 3-man committee against our wishes?
I hadn't heard that about Breece Hall, but it would make sense. 38th percentile broken tackle rate, 49th percentile yards after contact. That is not the running back we saw before his ACL a few years ago. The year after, not the same at all. So if that is correct, that he had a knee injury, we will find out in training camp very, very quickly if Breece Hall is back to looking like a difference maker. And if it was a knee injury, we'll know it right away. And in that case, he is a steal at running back 13. But if you don't hear glowing reports about Breece Hall looking dynamic, then he somehow had some weird, unexplainable decline. And Isaiah Davis is good. I think he's better than Braylon Allen. I don't even think that's close, but they split the work equally. So, but that said, you have to hear something positive about Breece Hall, very positive, not just camp talk, but otherwise that's going to be the linchpin. That injury, I'm glad you said, because I didn't know about that.
Yeah, we'll see if we have enough time for me to look up but I do remember posting it. I do remember it being he said most of the season. So I thought that I wanted to bring that up.
It's huge.
Last but not least, so I think we agree on it being an RPO heavy offense, probably even a one read offense. Does this mean that Garrett Wilson is, locked into 170, 180 targets? I mean, maybe the target number is wrong, but are we talking like alpha usage here?
Well, I'll repeat. DJ Moore had 136 targets, 96 catches, 1,364 yards, and 8 touchdowns with Justin Fields. And that was with 4 or 5 Tyson Bagent games in there. So, yes, Breece Hall has no competition. What are they talking up? Josh Reynolds is the number 2 recently. They said that in the last few days.
Yes.
Good luck. Yes. Garrett Wilson has always had between 147 and 168 targets all 3 years. Yes, that is his floor. 190 is a ceiling. That's where we're looking. They have nobody else. Mason Taylor, like I said, I like him, but Garrett Wilson will get open.
JJ, it's your team. You have anything else you want to throw in there?
No, Jim's mouth to God's ears. Let's go Mason Taylor. We need a tight end. But yeah, besides those 3 guys in Fields, that's all it is. It's a pretty simple offense, and they have a good offensive line. So I'm looking forward to see what they can do
for the first time since what? Rex Ryan?
Yeah, basically. All right. It is their anniversary. Let's talk about the Eagles.
Oh boy.
Dubberts.
I was surprised looking through that. I looked through this real quick, but the only thing that stood out to me, and I'm just going to take you over to the run splits. It's not that they did anything more so, zone more significantly more than man or whatever. I just want you to look at the huge numbers. Again, they ran for 3,000 yards. They ran for over 1,200 yards in zone and over 1,200 yards in man. If you rewind through some of this stuff, you'll see 500 and 600. We know that the Eagles were a dynamic running attack last year, but that should give you some idea how good the offensive line is, that they can zone block and they can man block, and they have the best of pretty much everything. So, what does this offense? What does the new offense coordinator bring in that Kellen Moore leaves behind, or what can we expect from here?
Normally, I would throw shade on an offensive coordinator with no serious experience, but it doesn't matter here. You run the ball and you throw when you need to. You throw play action. You throw on design shots. You've got A.J. Brown. You got Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert when he's healthy. Like the Jets, it's a very basic small number of people. They're getting the ball, and there's nothing the defense can do to stop them. It's that simple. So rolling it back, you don't need to make adjustments. The teams on defense cannot adjust to you, because if you try to stop the run, they kill you through the air. It's that simple. So on a per game basis, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith were actually fine last year. They weren't as great as we wanted them to be per game. They both missed time. So I think we're selling them down. I don't think they have the upside, though. I think both of them don't have their highest upside because this team is going to run. They're going to lead games, and that's what they're going to do in the second half. They're going to run the football.
The only question that comes up off the top of my head is, so the Eagles lost Mekhi Becton to the Chargers. Is that enough to, I don't want to say downgrade, but is that enough to dial back expectations for the offense? Or is it just, look, Joan Mailata and Lane Johnson and Dickerson and everybody's just so good that they'll make up for it.
Becton was a luxury. They couldn't bring him back. It's going to just take a cherry off the top, maybe. That's all. It's a cherry off the top. You lose 1/5 of an elite offensive line, you can make up for that. Yeah. Maybe you lose 100 yards over the course of the season for Barkley. Maybe. I don't even think it's that. Really great point. But I think ultimately this line is so good, I don't know that it matters. Now, we can't predict injuries. If they deal with injuries, then, of course, later that could be a problem. But as of right now, no adjustment at all.
And to me, Becton was coached up by Stoutland. Becton wasn't the Becton he was before. Stoutland is the key there.
Stoutland, yep. I'll ask you this. I didn't have this in mind before when I asked you the first question, and this doesn't have anything to do necessarily with OC changes or strategy, but where are you on Barkley coming off the 480 touches? where are you on him?
This is tough because that workload is just insane. But you know what? Career-wise, there's not a ton of tread off the tires. Early in his career, he missed a lot of time. So, and he gets a lot of times where he's not getting punished up front. All right. I'm dropping an article in July. My offseason research, and I just give me a minute on this. Running back injuries and hits are being lessened. Why? Last year was the most 2 linebacker sets I have ever seen on defense. Used to be 3 and 4. Now there's only 2 on the field because everybody's selling outside the pass. That's one less thumper. It's easier for every offensive lineman and tight end to get a hat on a run stopper. You're not seeing these big hits anymore. The other thing is, every year we're watching the size of the linebackers get smaller and smaller and smaller. They're down to like 240 on average, if that. So now it's smaller guys hitting you. There are less of them on the field. They're getting blocked. So I think the injury bug is not going to be a problem. I think Barkley not taking those massive hits. Can you sprain an ankle? Yes. Can you twist a knee? Yes. But I think a lot of the durability stuff, I think these running backs are going to come out a lot better because the hitting isn't there.
JJ, any other questions for you? I have one other quick question if you don't.
No, go ahead.
All right. So again, this isn't a strategy or an OC change as much as it is. So since we're a little bit worried about Barkley's workload from last year, who do we stash if we want to handcuff him?
Well, it has to be Will Shipley because A.J. Dillon was decent as a rookie, but he declined every single year since. I don't think he could break a tackle. I think he runs in concrete right now. So I don't think he's even an option. And the fact that they didn't bring in any serious help besides that, and the fact it looks like they must trust Will Shipley now that Kenny Gainwell's out of the picture. So, and you're getting Shipley's one of the cheapest handcuffs, about running back 64 on average. So he is like super, super cheap. And I think that's worth the ticket. Will he take all the work? No, of course he won't. They'll blend other people in, whatever they have to do. But I still think you'll get 12 to 14 touches out of Shipley should Barkley miss time.
One point I come across last night that made a lot of sense to me was that I believe Kenneth Gainwell, of course, backup last year, his primary backup last year, signed a contract, 1 year at $1.25 million in Pittsburgh. So it wasn't like the Eagles couldn't bring him back. So that either suggests a lot of confidence in Dillon, or it suggests a lot of confidence in Shipley. So I thought that was poignant, and it was fun. As I was doing some research, and it was fun to see Will Shipley run again. And I think he's not only do I agree with Jim on the whole offensive line analysis, I think that's going to be they're not going to miss Becton, and we're going to have a guest on next month, Dan Fornek, I think, who sings the praises of Jeff Stoutland. Stoutland, I don't remember the last time Stoutland had a bad offensive line, and you just believe if you question the line, if Stoutland's coaching it, you don't question it anymore. So, but yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. I'll just add this real quickly. Personal, I haven't had any of my rookie drafts yet. I'm currently considering and will probably accept a trade offer tonight that will get me Aaron Rodgers, which I wasn't looking for a backup quarterback, but getting Will Shipley for the 309 because I have Barkley as an orphan, and I'll be getting Shipley essentially for the 309. And I think I'm going to be happy with that.
You might get a senior discount for having Aaron Rodgers on your roster too.
Oh. I almost kicked you off the pod just for saying you traded for Aaron Rodgers.
All right, God. JJ, let's roll the rest of this thing out.
Last one.
Tampa I meant Bay. You and me. You're kicking Doug off.
Yeah, we can. Let's do this.
All this every week I have to put up with getting kicked off a show I co-host. That doesn't make any sense to me. Anyhow. All right, so going through this real quick. Tampa Bay, this is obviously under Liam Cohen, ran 11 personnel, 71% clip, which is 10% over the league average. I thought it was interesting. Baker can throw the ball downfield. I mean, not great, but I wouldn't say he's a great deep ball thrower. But I was surprised to see only 8.8% deep throws on his resume there for last year. The thing that stuck out to me the most, if you want to go over to the run splits, the zone man runs were about the same, but holy cow, the yards per carry, 3.3 running behind zone blocking, 6.3 running behind man. So I guess, first of all, do you have any thoughts on that's a year-long total. Is that we'll do the split time in the first half of the season, and then the man blocking came along when Bucky Irving started emerging. Is any thoughts on that?
One thing I'll say is this, and this doesn't get factored in, the amount of motion in gadgeting that Liam Cohen used, it accelerated the run game. The offensive line is very good. Mason Graham, the rookie center last year, as good as I hoped he would be, and I think he's going to get better. That offensive line was outstanding. So you had that, but I really think it was how they dressed everything up, and also how defenses always had to be worried about the passing attack. Mike Evans out there, unfortunately, Chris Godwin missed the second half of the season, and Bucky Irving just he would get downhill quickly. Whichever run he was outside run, he would get downhill quickly, and he was outstanding after contact. So I think the run splits you mentioned, very pertinent, but I think a lot of that, as I'm saying, was that gadgetry of sorts that was used. And that's where I worry about Josh Grizzard. I think this offense was a perfect storm last year, 41 touchdowns for Baker. Everything was perfect. And I think this offense is going to be very good, but I think the perfect storm won't be there, because I don't know if Grizzard is going to, again, have that, as you say, sequencing of plays, sequencing of trickery. All those things are a big deal that made this offense better. But again, the bones of this offense are incredible, and it's going to be a good season regardless of the coaching.
So many places we could go here. I'll try to keep it at 3 questions. But so you said the last year was the perfect storm. How far away from the perfect storm? Again, we're talking, I know injuries and whatnot, the schedule and whatnot, but if let's say the last year was a 9 out of 10 outcome for Bucky Irving, what should we expect this year? I guess
it's really a tough one, because he was a great runner. He ran great, and it's very hard to throw shade on a young man that played as he did. So, 96 percentile yards after contact, 88th percentile broken tackle rate. Those are amazing numbers. And as a receiver, 93rd percentile after the catch. So it's hard to throw shade on him. But again, if everything's not set up exactly right, and maybe they go to more of a committee. In the last 3 games, which included 2 NFL playoff games, Rashad White was like a non-factor. They phased him out. Does that continue? It's going to be, look, I think we're drafting Bucky Irving at his absolute ceiling. He had 88 yards per game the rest of the season. I think there are a lot of ways he can be a really good back, but have some fantasy regression where he's more like the running back 12, 13, 14, and we're drafting him at running back 10. To me, the perfect storm is needed for that, and I'm not willing to bet on that.
Jim, I'm going to ask you to set me straight on this one, but I expect you to agree with me because we won't invite you back if you don't. So,
oh shucks,
I will.
No, so I'm of the belief that Tampa Bay is going to be so improved defensively, and they won't. I think Cohen was great for them offensively. I think they'll backtrack a little bit, like you said. I think they'll backtrack a little bit offensively, but my reason for asking this is, do we make anything of Sean Tucker?
He saw a moderate snap jump in those 3 games where Rashad White was down, but the usage, he had 1 game with 8 carries, but he wasn't really used. So right now, he's like a man without a country. I don't know what his role is. He's not taking Bucky Irving's role, and he's not what Rashad White was when he was playing, not the receiving back. So at best, he gets some change of pace work if White is phased out as he was. But again, it didn't result in much work. So I think it's strictly handcuff. And I do think Sean Tucker would see significant early down and red zone work in a maybe 60-40 over Rashad White split if Irving missed time.
I'm of agreement with that. I think there's a case to be made that he ends up being the 4-minute back and not the goal line back, because I think Irving can handle that just fine. But the occasional goal line back, I think that's probably his upside for this year. I do know that the coaching staff loves him, but it's just they can say it, but they need to actually show it. So I heard you say on another podcast, because I've listened to you 2 or 3 times over the course of the spring and summer. So I thought it was interesting because I thought it was a great point. I think you said the veterans are going to be pushing. If there's any question about what the receivers are going to do, the veterans are going to push for Chris Godwin to remain the slot receiver as opposed to having Emeka Ibuka be that option. So I guess if you want to just kind of lay out what you expect, do you expect Mike Evans to continue being the X that he has been, and Godwin in the slot and Ibuka out wide, or do you think it's going to be McMillan and Ibuka sharing snaps? What do you think is going to happen there?
So Chris Godwin is a devastating blocker, and when you move him into the slot, he's also dangerous on those plays when you want to run a draw or a specific run play as well. So I think putting him there, it's not just a matter of he's an elite slot receiver. He's also great on the outside. But I think that dirty work he does is a real important part. And he can even block in the receiving game. So I think it's a necessary part of the offense. And it's going to be really hard to go away from that. I do want to sidetrack and just point this out quickly. This is an important stat. Mike Evans, while Chris Godwin was on the field last year, averaged 13.6 PPR points. Once Godwin went down, Evans went from 13.6 to 21 points per game. The targets 6.5 per game when Godwin was on the field, 9 per game without Godwin. Baker Mayfield has a good chemistry with his slot receivers going back to the Jarvis Landry days. In the 2 years they played together healthy, it was like a 990-yard average for Jarvis Landry. And of course, Chris Godwin is exponentially better. So the draft position, Godwin's going about wide receiver 31, Evans around wide receiver 20. That's a mistake. The health thing I get. All right, so maybe Godwin gets hurt. But right now, dislocated ankle, he's back from that. So Godwin's your steal in your draft. I wanted to throw that in there before I carried on.
JJ, I have one other question, mate. Kind of. If you do you have anything?
I do not. You can finish this off, my friend.
Yeah. So, I guess what I was saying or going to ask was then I guess Ibuka, is it going to be Ibuka and McMillan splitting snaps? Do you think? Or go ahead.
It's a tough call because McMillan produced late in the season. It was real touchdown heavy. I'm going to say that. Very touchdown heavy. But there's first-round draft capital. But, like, McMillan is a third-round pick. So it's not like he was, like, this dart throw pick late. So you have to think the first-round player is going to get every chance to get in the lineup. But am I sure with the chemistry that McMillan already built with Baker Mayfield that he's not going to look better? I think they're splitting that role. I think Ibuka probably gets more work than McMillan. You can't shove McMillan to the curb. I mean, they're fighting for the scraps behind Godwin's and Evans anyway, but you can't kick him to the curb.
That's all I got. And I know we kept Jim past his bedtime. So
No, I got XM from top of the hour for a couple hours tonight.
Oh, geez.
You are a machine.
Show those muscles again.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Oh, Lord. All right. A big thank you to Jim for taking the time to come and chat with us. It's always a highlight of my summer to see you in Canton, get the selfie and have a nice dinner with you.
Yes.
Why don't you let the people know where they can find you and any final thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, everything's on the X at Jim Coventry NFL. It'll send you to any videos I do. We're doing videos all the time at Rotowire. Set you with stat of the day, thread of the day. It's all set up for you. Rotowire gets you 15% off any subscription. Use the code YouTube15. My written articles are there. That's the only place you can get those.
All right, Doug.
I marvel at the reads. Jim's reads are awesome. Yep. So since we've last done this, I had a Scott Fishbowl preview, and then my first offensive line article came out about the AFC here. I believe it was yesterday. So go ahead and check that out. And I'm looking forward to next week when we do the final grades for the run, the pass, and then the complete breakdown to see how the offensive line stack out. But anyway, that's. I'm now into my writing schedule, so look for my articles every Tuesday at FF Today.
Doug is in his writing era. I'm at JJ Wenner on the socials. You can follow the pod at FF Diehards on X. Thank you all for listening and commenting in the chat. Please like and subscribe. We will be back next Wednesday to discuss the Scott Fishbowl. And until then, love yourself. Know your worth. You are enough. Boat drinks, my friends. Boat drinks.